You probably think you know a predator when you see one. You imagine a man with cold eyes and a cruel smile lurking in the shadows. But you are wrong. The most dangerous predators do not hide in the dark. They stand right next to you in the sunlight, holding your hand and pouring you a glass of vintage wine. They wear expensive suits and smell like sandalwood and old money. They charm your friends and they make your family jealous of your luck. That was Gideon. He did not hunt me with a weapon. He hunted me with a wedding ring and a dream house built on the edge of a cliff. He thought that because I was 62, I was desperate for love. He thought I was past my prime. He forgot that before I was a wife, I was the best forensic accountant in the state. He thought he was building me a home, but I realized too late that he was actually building me a cage. And tonight, I am going to show you how I broke the bars. The fog rolls in off the Pacific Ocean like a heavy gray blanket this morning. It obscures the sharp, jagged rocks at the bottom of the cliff, where the waves crash with a violence that shakes the very foundation of this house. Cliffside Manor is what Gideon calls it. It is a masterpiece of modern architecture. Glass walls and steel beams and polished concrete floors that are always just a little too cold against my bare feet. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in the living room, holding a cup of herbal tea that had gone lukewarm minutes ago. The house was silent. Gideon had left early for a meeting in the city, leaving a note on the marble counter that simply said, "Back for dinner, my love." It was the kind of note a devoted husband leaves. But as I stared out into the white nothingness of the fog, I felt a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. It started with a notification on my phone 3 days ago. Just a small ping that I almost ignored. It was an alert from my primary bank, the bank where I had kept my life savings and my pension and the settlement from my late first husband. The alert said that a transfer request had been initiated. I am a meticulous woman. I have to be. 30 years of digging through cooked books and hiding assets for the government taught me that the devil is always in the details. I sat down at Gideon's expansive mahogany desk and opened my laptop. I tried to log into my account, but the screen flashed red. Access denied. Contact administrator. My heart hammered against my ribs. I picked up the phone and dialed the private client line. The voice on the other end was cheerful and professional. "Mrs. Blackwood," the teller said. "We are just finalizing the consolidation request your husband submitted. All assets are being moved to the Blackwood Trust as per the joint custody agreement you signed." I felt the blood drain from my face. I had signed a stack of papers the week before. Gideon had told me it was for insurance and estate planning. He said it was to protect me in case anything happened to him. He had rushed me through it between sips of champagne and kisses on my neck. I realized with a sickening jolt that I had broken my own cardinal rule. Never sign anything you haven't read 3 times. I told the teller to stop. I told her I did not authorize a full transfer. There was a pause on the line. "I am sorry, Mrs. Blackwood," the teller said, "but your signature is on the power of attorney. Gideon Blackwood has full executory rights over your finances." I hung up the phone, and the silence of the house suddenly felt heavy. Oppressive. I looked around at the beautiful minimalist furniture and the art on the walls. It didn't look like a home anymore. It looked like a stage set, and I was just a prop. I walked into the kitchen and poured the tea down the sink. I needed to think. I needed to see exactly what I had signed. Gideon kept his files in a locked cabinet in the study. He usually wore the key on a chain around his neck, but he had a spare. I knew he did. He was arrogant, and arrogant men always make mistakes because they believe they are untouchable. I remembered seeing him put something in a hollowed-out book on the top shelf of the library a few weeks ago. He thought I was napping on the sofa, but I had been watching him through half-closed eyes. I walked into the library. The smell of leather and old paper usually calmed me, but today it smelled like deception. I climbed the rolling ladder and pulled down the thick volume of Roman history. It was heavy. I opened it, and there inside the cutout pages was a small silver key. My hands were trembling as I climbed down. I walked back to the study and inserted the key into the filing cabinet. It turned with a smooth click. I pulled the drawer open. Inside were neatly labeled folders, house blueprints, investments, and then a folder with my name on it. Celia. I opened it. It wasn't just the bank transfer. There were deeds to my small apartment in the city which I had planned to keep as a rental. He had already listed it for sale. There were transfer forms for my copyright on the forensic accounting software I had developed in the 90s. He was stripping me down. He was liquidating my entire life and pouring it into his own accounts. I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel in the driveway. Gideon was back early. I shoved the papers back into the folder and slammed the drawer shut. I locked it and ran back to the library. I shoved the key back into the book and put the book on the shelf just as the front door opened. "Celia," he called out. His voice was rich and warm. "Honey, I am home." I stood at the top of the ladder, my heart pounding so hard, I thought he would hear it across the room. I took a deep breath and forced a smile onto my face. "I am in here, darling," I called back. He walked into the doorway. He looked handsome in his charcoal suit. He smiled up at me, but for the first time, I saw past the charm. I saw the calculation in his eyes. He wasn't looking at his wife. He was looking at an acquisition. "What are you doing up there?" he asked. "Just looking for something to read," I said. I gripped the ladder tight to stop my hands from shaking. He walked over and placed a hand on my calf. His touch made my skin crawl. "Come down," he said. "I have news. The investors love the new designs for the resort. We are going to be very rich, Celia." I climbed down and let him kiss my cheek. I smelled the expensive cologne, and beneath it, the faint metallic scent of rain. "I am so happy for you, Gideon," I said. "For us," he corrected me. "For us." I looked into his eyes, and I knew then that I was in a fight for my life. He didn't just want my money. He wanted to erase me. He wanted to absorb everything I had built and then discard me like he had discarded his past. But he didn't know who he was dealing with. He thought he had married a lonely old widow. He was about to find out that he had married a detective. I pulled away gently. "I am going to freshen up for dinner," I said. I walked up the floating staircase to our bedroom. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was racing. I needed evidence. The papers in the drawer were legal because I had been foolish enough to sign them. I needed something else. I needed to find the dirt. I went into the walk-in closet to change. As I reached for a dress, I bumped into the back wall of the closet. It sounded hollow. Not just drywall hollow, but deep hollow. Like there was space behind it. I frowned. I remembered the layout of the house. This wall should have been the exterior wall. There should be nothing behind it but rain and cliffs. I pushed aside the silk blouses and pressed my ear against the wood. A draft, a cold, tiny draft of air, was coming through a microscopic seam in the paneling. I thought about the blueprints I had seen in the drawer downstairs. I hadn't looked closely at them. I needed to see them. I needed to know what Gideon was hiding in the walls of this house. Downstairs, I heard Gideon pouring a drink. The ice clinked against the glass. It was a cheerful sound, the sound of a man who thinks he has won. I changed into a black dress. I put on my pearls. I applied my lipstick like war paint. I looked at myself in the mirror. The fear was gone. In its place was a cold, hard rage. I am going to find out what is behind that wall, I whispered to my reflection. And then I am going to tear this house down, brick by brick. Dinner that night was a performance. I sat across from Gideon at the long glass table and cut my roasted salmon into tiny, precise squares. He talked about the new resort project and the difficult zoning laws in the county. He laughed and poured wine and acted like the perfect gentleman. I nodded and smiled and asked the right questions, but underneath the table, my hands were clenched so tight my fingernails dug into my palms. I was sleeping with the enemy. I was breaking bread with the man who was systematically erasing my existence. The next morning, the coastal fog was even thicker. It pressed against the windows like a physical weight. Gideon was agitated. He checked his watch 3 times before he even finished his coffee. He told me there was a crisis at the construction site, a structural failure in the foundation of the new wing. He kissed me on the forehead, a dry, perfunctory kiss, and told me he would be back late. I watched his silver sedan disappear into the mist. As soon as the taillights faded, the clock started ticking. I knew I had hours, but panic makes minutes feel like seconds. I did not go to the kitchen to clean up breakfast. I went straight to the library. I climbed the ladder and retrieved the key from the hollowed-out history book. My movements were sharp and efficient. The shock of yesterday had evaporated, leaving only the cold logic of the forensic accountant. I treat a crime scene like a balance sheet. Something is always missing, or something is always added that shouldn't be there. You just have to find the discrepancy. I unlocked the filing cabinet in his study. This time, I ignored the financial files. I knew the money was gone. I needed to know what else he was hiding. I pulled out the heavy roll of blueprints labeled Cliffside Manor Final as built. I carried them to the dining room table because it was the only surface large enough to unroll them completely. I used heavy crystal candle holders to weigh down the corners. The paper smelled of ammonia and dust. I stared at the white lines on the blue paper. It was a beautiful house. On paper, it looked like a work of art. I traced the lines of the first floor and the guest suites and the kitchen. Everything seemed normal. Then I moved my finger to the second floor, to the master suite. I pulled a tape measure from the kitchen drawer. I am a woman who believes in verification. I measured the blueprint scale. 1/4 inch equaled 1 foot. I looked at the drawing of the master bedroom. The closet wall where I had felt the draft was marked as a solid structural wall. Behind it, the blueprints showed a large void labeled Mechanical Chase, HVAC. This was supposedly where the heating ducts and electrical risers ran from the basement to the roof. I did the math. The mechanical chase was drawn as being 4 feet deep. 4 feet. I frowned. I had audited construction firms before. I knew building codes. A standard residential chase for a house this size needed to be maybe 18 inches wide, 2 feet at the most. 4 feet was enormous. You could fit a staircase in 4 feet. You could fit a person. I grabbed a notepad and a pencil. I needed to verify the physical reality against the paper reality. I ran up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. My breath hitched in my chest, not from exertion, but from the thrill of the hunt. I went into the master bedroom. I took the tape measure and measured the distance from the doorframe to the far wall. 22 feet. Then I went out into the hallway. The hallway ran parallel to the bedroom. I measured the distance from the bedroom doorframe to the end of the hall, which aligned with the exterior wall of the house. I stared at the tape measure. 26 feet. I did the calculation again. Inside the room, the wall stopped at 22 feet. Outside the room, the house extended to 26 feet. There was a 4-foot gap. A 4-foot discrepancy between the interior wall of my closet and the exterior skin of the house. It wasn't a mechanical chase. There were no vents on the roof above that spot. I had seen the roofline from the garden. It was flat and unbroken. I went back into the walk-in closet. I pushed aside the silk dresses and the cashmere coats. I knelt down and pressed my hands against the wood paneling. It was beautiful, dark walnut paneling that went from floor to ceiling. It looked seamless, but nothing is truly seamless. I ran my fingertips along the baseboard. I was looking for a trigger, a latch, a hidden hinge. Gideon was an architect. He loved puzzles. He loved clever mechanisms. He wouldn't use a simple door handle. He would use something elegant. I pressed on the knots in the wood. Nothing. I tried sliding the panels left and right. Nothing. Then I looked down at the floor. The hardwood floorboards ran horizontally into the closet, but right at the edge of the wall, one single board was slightly lighter than the others. It was worn, like it had been pressed repeatedly. I placed my thumb on that specific board and pushed down. Click. A soft mechanical sound echoed from inside the wall. It sounded like a heavy deadbolt retracting. My heart hammered in my throat. I pushed on the walnut panel. It swung inward silently on hidden hinges. A rush of stale, cold air hit my face. It didn't smell like a ventilation shaft. It smelled like old dust and ozone and something else. Something faint and floral. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness. It wasn't a mechanical chase. It was a room. A narrow, secret room about 4 feet wide and 10 feet long. The walls were lined with soundproofing foam, the kind used in recording studios. There was a small desk, a chair, and a sleeping bag rolled up in the corner. I stepped inside. The air was suffocating. I swept the light over the desk. There were monitors, dark screens that were currently turned off. I touched the mouse and the screens flickered to life. My breath caught in my throat. The screens showed live feeds, 6 different camera angles. One was the kitchen, one was the living room, one was the library, and one was the master bedroom right outside the closet door. He was watching me. He was always watching me. I looked at the corner of the screen. A red dot was blinking, recording. I backed away, terrified that he was watching me right now on his phone. But then I saw the feed from the garage. It was empty. He was still gone. I turned to leave, my instinct screaming at me to run, but my foot kicked something on the floor. It skittered across the concrete with a hollow rattle. I shined the light down. It was an earring, a single pearl drop earring with a distinctive gold twist. I froze. I knew this earring. I had seen it in a photograph. A photograph of Gideon's second wife, Mariana, the one who died of a heart attack 3 years ago. She was wearing these earrings in her obituary photo. Why was her earring in a secret soundproof room hidden behind the closet of his new wife? I bent down and picked it up. It was cold. Suddenly, I heard a noise downstairs. The heavy thud of the front door closing. The beep of the security system disarming. Gideon was home. I was standing inside the wall of his secrets, and he was walking up the stairs. The footsteps were heavy and deliberate. They echoed on the floating oak treads of the staircase like the heartbeat of a giant beast. Thud, thud, thud. I was standing inside the belly of the house with the ghost of a dead woman in my hand. The monitors hummed softly in the dark, casting a sickly blue light over my face. I watched the screen labeled stairwell. I saw the top of Gideon's head. He was moving fast. He wasn't strolling. He was taking the steps 2 at a time. Panic is a cold bucket of water. It shocks you, but then it wakes you up. I knew I had less than 10 seconds before he walked through the bedroom door. If he found me in here, there would be no explanation. There would be no lie clever enough to save me. I would just disappear into the wall like the others. I shoved the pearl earring into the pocket of my dress. I scrambled backward out of the narrow room. My heel caught on the lip of the threshold, and I almost stumbled, but I caught myself on the doorframe. I stepped back onto the soft carpet of the closet. The door to the secret room was still wide open, a gaping black mouth in the walnut paneling. I looked down at the floorboard. The trigger. I stomped on it with my heel. Nothing happened. My heart stopped. The footsteps were on the landing now. I could hear the rustle of his jacket. I pressed the board again harder this time, putting my full weight on it. Please. A soft whirring sound engaged inside the wall. The heavy wooden panel began to slide shut. It moved agonizingly slow. It was like watching a glacier move while a train was bearing down on you. I heard the bedroom door handle turn. The brass latch clicked. The panel was still moving. There was a 6-inch gap, a 4-inch gap. I grabbed a red silk blouse from the hanger nearest to me and whipped it off the rack. I held it up against my chest, pretending to examine it, blocking the view of the closing wall with my body. Gideon walked into the bedroom. "Celia?" His voice was sharp. "Where are you?" The panel clicked shut behind me with a sound no louder than a snapping twig. I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for an hour. "In here, darling," I called out. I forced my voice to be steady, but it came out a little breathless, a little too high. He walked into the closet. He filled the space. Gideon is a large man, broad shoulders and tall. In the small confines of the walk-in closet, he felt overwhelming. He stopped 3 feet away from me. He wasn't smiling. He looked at me, and then he looked past me at the wall of walnut paneling. He scanned the wood. His eyes were narrowing. He was like a shark smelling blood in the water. He knew something was different. The air was disturbed. "I didn't expect you home so soon," I said, turning to hang the blouse back up. My hands were shaking, so I gripped the hanger until my knuckles turned white. I thought the foundation had cracked. "It was a false alarm," he said. His voice was flat. He wasn't looking at me. He was sniffing the air. "It smells like dust in here. Stale air. Have you been moving things around?" I froze. The air from the secret room. It had that distinct smell of ozone and old, trapped time. It had leaked out when I opened the door. "I was looking for my winter coat," I lied. "I pulled down some of the boxes from the top shelf. They were very dusty. I suppose I need to call the cleaners." He looked at the top shelf. It was undisturbed. He looked back at me. His eyes were cold blue chips of ice. For a moment, I thought he was going to grab me. I thought he was going to push me aside and press the hidden floorboard and throw me into the dark. But then the mask slipped back into place. The charming smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You shouldn't be lifting heavy boxes, Celia," he said. His voice dropped to that smooth baritone that used to make my knees weak. "That's what the staff is for. You need to preserve your strength." "I am perfectly capable, Gideon," I said, brushing past him to get out of the closet. I needed space. I needed to get away from the wall. He caught my arm. His grip was firm. Not painful, but possessing. "You look pale," he said. He reached up and touched my cheek. His fingers were cold. "Are you feeling unwell?" "Just a headache," I said. "The fog. It gives me a migraine." He held my gaze for a second too long. He was studying my pupils. He was checking for deceit. "Go lie down," he said finally, letting go of my arm. I will make you some tea. I walked out of the bedroom and into the hallway. I didn't go to the guest room to lie down. I went to the bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the faucet to mask any sound. I leaned over the sink and dry heaved. The adrenaline was leaving my system and it left me shaking and nauseous. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the earring. I held it up to the light. It was real. A South Sea pearl. It was identical to the one Mariana wore in her portrait that hung in the hallway. Gideon had told me she lost the other one in the hospital before she died. He said she was so swollen from the fluids that they had to cut her rings off. He cried when he told me that story. He was a liar. She didn't lose it in the hospital. She lost it in that room. And then a terrifying realization hit me. I closed my eyes and pictured the secret room again. I saw the desk. I saw the monitors. I saw the sleeping bag. And I saw the back of the walnut panel. The inside of the door. It was smooth. There was no handle. There was no keypad. There was no floorboard trigger on the inside. I grabbed the edge of the marble sink to steady myself. The room wasn't just a spy center. It was a vault. If the door closed while you were inside, you were trapped. You couldn't get out. You were sealed in a soundproof box with no ventilation and no way to signal the outside world. That was why the sleeping bag was there. That was why there was a bucket in the corner that I hadn't registered until now. He didn't just spy on them. He kept them there. I looked at the pearl in my hand. Had Mariana died of a heart attack in a hospital bed like he said? Or had she died in the dark scratching at a walnut wall while he sat at his desk and watched her on a monitor? I wrapped the earring in a tissue and buried it deep inside my makeup bag. I couldn't confront him. Not yet. If I showed him the earring, he would know I had found the room. And if he knew I found the room, I would never leave this house alive. I splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked old. My skin was gray, and the lines around my eyes seemed deeper. But my eyes were sharp. They were the eyes of the woman who had brought down the Enron executives in '99. I unlocked the bathroom door. I walked downstairs. Gideon was in the kitchen brewing tea. The kettle whistled. "Here you go, my love," he said, handing me a steaming mug. "Chamomile. It will help you sleep." I took the mug. "Thank you, Gideon." "I was thinking," he said, leaning against the counter. "Since you are not feeling well, maybe we should cancel the dinner party tonight. I can tell the guests you are under the weather." "No," I said quickly. Too quickly. I needed people. I needed witnesses. If I was isolated in this house with him, I was dead. I needed the noise and the lights and the eyes of strangers. "I will be fine," I said. "I just need an hour to rest. I want to meet your friends, Gideon. I want to show them what a lucky woman I am." He smiled. "You are a trooper, Celia. That is what I love about you. You are tough." "You have no idea," I whispered as I turned to walk away. I went to the guest bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't drink the tea. I poured it into the potted plant in the corner. I didn't trust anything he gave me anymore. I took out my phone. I needed to know more about the guests coming tonight. Gideon had sent me the guest list days ago. I scrolled through the names. Most were investors or local politicians, but one name stood out. Dr. Eris Thorne. He was the chief medical examiner for the county. Why would Gideon invite a medical examiner to a dinner party? Unless they were friends. Unless the doctor was the one who signed the death certificates. I typed the doctor's name into the search bar. Eris Thorne, medical examiner. Scandal. Nothing came up. He was clean, respected, but everyone has a price. Or a secret. I had 4 hours before dinner. I opened my laptop. I wasn't going to rest. I was going to run a background check on the man who signed Mariana Blackwood's death warrant. If Gideon had a weak link in his chain, it would be the people who helped him cover his tracks. I started typing. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I wasn't Celia the wife anymore. I was Celia the auditor, and I was about to open the books on the darkest transaction of my life. The house had transformed. The cold gray fog of the afternoon had been replaced by the warm amber glow of 100 hidden recessed lights. Gideon had hired a catering team that moved through the kitchen like a silent army in black vests. The smell of roasted duck and truffle oil filled the air, masking the lingering scent of ozone and dust that I could still smell on my own skin. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the bedroom. I had chosen a dress of midnight blue silk. It was high-necked and long-sleeved, conservative but elegant. It covered the goosebumps that refused to leave my arms. I fastened my diamond studs, the ones I had bought for myself 10 years ago. I did not wear the pearls Gideon gave me. I could not bear to have anything he touched against my skin tonight. I heard the doorbell ring. The first guests were arriving. I took a deep breath. I needed to go downstairs. I needed to play the role of the happy newlywed. If I showed fear, if I showed even a crack in the facade, Gideon would know. And if he knew I found the room, I wouldn't survive the night. I walked to the top of the stairs. Gideon was in the foyer, greeting a couple I didn't recognize. He looked up and saw me. His face lit up with a smile that would have fooled the devil himself. "There she is," he announced, spreading his arms. "My beautiful bride." He walked up a few steps to meet me, taking my hand and kissing the knuckles. His hand was warm now. His grip was possessive. He leaned in close to my ear and whispered so only I could hear. "You look stunning, Celia. Try not to tire yourself out tonight. Remember what the doctor said about your stress levels." He was already planting the seeds. He was already setting the stage for my decline. I smiled back at him, a tight, frozen smile. "I am feeling wonderful, Gideon," I said loudly enough for the guests to hear. I have never felt more alert. We descended the rest of the stairs together. The living room was filling up. There were about 12 people. Men in tuxedos, women in glittering gowns. They held crystal flutes of champagne and laughed with their heads thrown back. But as we entered the room, the conversation lulled. Heads turned. Eyes assessed me. I expected envy. I expected them to look at Gideon and then at me and wonder how an old forensic accountant landed the wealthy architect. But that wasn't what I saw. I saw pity. It was in the way the women tilted their heads. It was in the way the men shook my hand too gently, as if I were made of glass. I mingled. I accepted a glass of sparkling water. I moved from group to group, listening to the chatter. Gideon was the center of gravity. He told stories about the construction of the house, about his vision for the coast. He had his hand on the small of my back, constantly steering me, guiding me, controlling where I went and who I spoke to. But I am good at slipping through cracks. I waited until Gideon was cornered by a councilman complaining about property taxes. I slipped away toward the floor-to-ceiling windows where a man was standing alone looking out at the black void of the ocean. He was short with thinning hair and nervous hands that kept adjusting his glasses. He was drinking scotch, and he was drinking it fast. Dr. Eris Thorne. I recognized him from his online photo. He looked older in person, more tired. I walked up beside him. "The view is terrifying at night, isn't it, Doctor?" I said softly. He jumped slightly, spilling a drop of amber liquid on his hand. He looked at me with wide, startled eyes. Mrs. Blackwood? He stammered. I didn't see you there. Yes. Yes, it is. It's a sheer drop. Gideon. Gideon likes living on the edge. He does, I said, taking a sip of my water. I am so glad you could come tonight. Gideon speaks so highly of you. He relaxed a fraction. We go back a long way. I was the one who... Well, I was there for him when Mariana passed. A terrible tragedy. Yes, I said, turning my body to block Gideon's line of sight if he looked over. He told me. A heart attack. She was so young. 45? 46, Thorne corrected. He took a large gulp of scotch. Hidden heart defect. Undiagnosed. It happens. It's the silent killer. I watched his face. He was sweating, a fine sheen of perspiration on his upper lip even though the room was cool. It must have been awful, I pressed gently, keeping my voice sympathetic. Did she die here? In the house? No, Thorne said quickly. Too quickly. No, she was at the hospital. By the time I got there, she was gone. But you signed the death certificate, I said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact I had verified upstairs on my laptop. He stiffened. He looked at his glass. I did. As the county examiner, it was my duty. And as a friend, I wanted to spare Gideon the intrusion of a stranger handling the paperwork. That was kind of you, I said, moving a step closer. And the autopsy? Did that give any closure? Thorne froze. He turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw the fear in his eyes. It wasn't just nervousness, it was terror. There was no autopsy, Mrs. Blackwood, he whispered. Gideon. He was distraught. He didn't want her. Cut open. He pleaded with me. Given her family history of cardiac issues, I waived it. It's standard procedure when the cause is natural. My blood ran cold. No autopsy, no toxicology. Just a grieving husband's word and a corrupt doctor's signature. I see, I said. My voice was calm, but my mind was screaming. So no one actually looked. No one checked to see if it was really her heart. What are you implying? Thorne asked, his voice rising slightly in panic. Nothing, doctor, I said. Just that it is convenient to have a friend in the right place. I saw him glance over my shoulder. His eyes widened. Celia? Gideon's voice boomed behind me. I didn't jump. I turned slowly. Gideon was standing there with a tight smile on his face, but his eyes were blazing with fury. He knew. He had seen us talking. He had seen the doctor's sweating face. You are boring the poor doctor with your questions, Gideon said, stepping between us. He placed a hand on Thorne's shoulder. It looked like a friendly gesture, but I saw his fingers dig into the cheap fabric of the doctor's suit. Celia gets so confused lately, Aris. She forgets what I tell her. I told her all about Mariana, but she keeps asking. He looked at me. You are tired, darling. I can see it in your face. You look exhausted. He was doing it. He was rewriting reality in front of a witness. I am not tired, Gideon, I said firmly. I was just asking the doctor about his work. She is confused, Gideon said again, ignoring me, speaking only to Thorne. The early onset, it's progressing faster than we thought. Just yesterday she was hallucinating. She thought there were people in the walls. He laughed, a short, sharp sound. Can you imagine? People in the walls. Thorne looked at me then. The fear in his eyes was replaced by something else. Complicity. He nodded slowly. I see, Thorne said. That is a common symptom. Paranoia, auditory hallucinations. You should increase her dosage, Gideon. I intend to, Gideon said. They were talking about me as if I wasn't there, as if I were a patient, as if I were already gone. I looked around the room. The other guests were watching. They were nodding sympathetically. They bought it, the loving husband caring for his senile wife. If I screamed now, if I accused him of murder, they would just shake their heads and pity him more. I was trapped. Not in a secret room, but in a social cage. I think I will go to the kitchen, I said, keeping my dignity wrapped around me like armor. I need some water. Good idea, Gideon said. Take your pills, Celia. Don't forget. I walked away. I felt their eyes on my back. I walked through the dining room and into the swinging doors of the kitchen. The noise of the party faded. The kitchen was bright and sterile. The caterers were plating dessert. I leaned against the stainless steel counter. My hands were shaking. Thorne hadn't examined the body. Mariana could have been poisoned. She could have been suffocated. She could have died of thirst in that soundproof room, and Thorne simply signed the paper because Gideon told him to. And now Gideon had signaled to Thorne that I was a problem. Increase her dosage. That was a command. I needed to get out. I couldn't stay in this house tonight. I would take the car. I would drive to the police station. I had enough suspicion to file a report. I looked at the back door of the kitchen leading to the garage. I pushed off the counter and walked toward it. I was halfway there when the caterer, a young woman with a headset, stepped in front of me. "Oh, Mrs. Blackwood," she said cheerfully. "Mr. Blackwood asked us to keep this door locked because of the alarm system. He said you sometimes wander off." She pointed to the keypad. The light was red. "I need to get something from my car," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "Open it, please." "I can't, ma'am," she said apologetically. "Only Mr. Blackwood has the code. He was very specific. He said it was for your safety." I stared at the red light. He had locked me in. The dinner party wasn't a celebration. It was a containment protocol. He had brought these people here to witness my insanity, so that when I disappeared or died, it would look like the tragic end of a sick woman. I turned back to the kitchen. I grabbed a sharp paring knife from the butcher block when the caterer wasn't looking. I slid it up the sleeve of my silk dress. The cold steel against my forearm was the only real thing in this house. I wasn't going to the police station. I wasn't leaving this house. I had to go back into the lion's den. I had to smile and eat dessert and pretend I was the crazy old woman he wanted me to be. Because if I panicked now, I was dead. I took a deep breath, smoothed my dress, and pushed through the swinging doors back into the party. Gideon was waiting for me. He held out a glass of champagne. "Here you are, my love," he said. "A toast. To us." I took the glass. I looked into his predatory eyes. "To us," I whispered. I raised the glass to my lips, but I didn't drink. I watched him drink. And I planned his destruction. The morning sun hit the glass walls of the bedroom with a brilliance that felt like an interrogation lamp. I woke up with a headache that throbbed behind my eyes. I sat up, the silk sheets sliding off my body, and for a terrifying moment, I didn't know where I was. Then the smell of sea salt and expensive cedar wood hit me, and I remembered. I was in the cage. I threw off the covers. My dress from the night before was draped over the chair, but the knife, the paring knife I had stolen from the kitchen, was gone. I checked the floor. I checked under the cushion. Nothing. My heart rate spiked. I had slid it under the mattress before I fell asleep. I was certain of it. I am a creature of habit. I do not misplace things. I put on my robe and walked out into the hallway. The house was spotless. The caterers had vanished. The crystal glasses were gone. The only evidence of the party was a large bouquet of white lilies on the console table. They smelled like a funeral. I went straight to Gideon's study. I needed my laptop. I needed to send the files I had found on Dr. Thorne to my external drive. I opened the laptop lid. The screen glowed to life. I typed in my password, Auditor 999. The screen shook. Incorrect password. I frowned. I typed it again, slower this time. AUDITOR1999. Incorrect password. Damn it, I hissed. I tried a third time. Good morning, darling. I jumped. Gideon was standing in the doorway holding 2 mugs of coffee. He was wearing a soft cashmere sweater and jeans. He looked rested. He looked like the picture of a concerned husband. You're up early, he said, walking over to place a mug on the desk. How is your head? My password isn't working, I said, ignoring the coffee. I stared at him. What did you do to my computer? Gideon sighed. It was a long, patient sigh that made my blood boil. Celia, we talked about this last night. You changed it. You said you were worried about hackers. Don't you remember? I did no such thing, I snapped. I was at a dinner party. I was talking to your corrupt friend, Dr. Thorne. Gideon's face didn't change. He just looked sad. You were very agitated last night, Celia. You were telling people that the house was shrinking. You told the mayor's wife that I was stealing your thoughts. I never said that! I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. Stop lying to me. I'm not lying, sweetheart, he said softly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small orange prescription bottle. Dr. Thorne dropped these off this morning. He thinks they will help stabilize your mood. The anxiety is making you confused. He set the pills on the desk next to the computer. I am not confused, I said, my voice shaking with rage. I know what I saw. I know what is in this house. And what is that? Gideon asked. He crossed his arms. Tell me again, Celia. What is in the house? The room, I said. The room behind the closet, the one with the monitors, the one where you watched Mariana die. The room went silent. The only sound was the distant crashing of the waves. Gideon looked at me with deep pity. Celia, there is no room. I showed you the blueprints. The blueprints are fake, I yelled. I went inside. I saw the desk. I saw the sleeping bag. Okay, Gideon said. He held up his hands in surrender. Okay, let's go look. If it will make you feel better, we will go look right now. He turned and walked toward the stairs. I followed him. I felt a surge of triumph. He was bluffing. He thought I wouldn't push it, but I was going to expose him. I was going to open that wall and show him that I knew his secret. We walked into the master bedroom. Gideon stood back, gesturing to the closet. Go ahead, he said. I marched into the closet. I pushed aside the clothes. I found the specific floorboard, the one that was slightly lighter, the one I had pressed yesterday. I stomped on it. Nothing happened. I stomped on it again, harder. The wood felt solid. There was no give, no click, no mechanical whir. It's stuck, I stammered. I got down on my knees. I pressed the board with my hands. I clawed at the edges of the walnut paneling. Open it! I know you locked it! Celia, Gideon said from the doorway. Please, stop. It's here, I screamed, pounding my fist against the wall. It's right here! Gideon walked over. He was carrying a cordless drill. Move aside, he said gently. What are you doing? I'm going to prove to you that you are unwell, he said. He put the drill bit against the walnut paneling, the beautiful seamless wood, and pulled the trigger. The drill whined as it bored a hole straight through the wood. My mouth fell open. He was destroying his own house. He pulled the drill out. Then he took a small fiber-optic camera, the kind plumbers use, and fed the snake-like tube into the hole. He handed me the display screen. Look, he said. I looked at the small, grainy screen. The light from the camera illuminated the space behind the wall. It was filled with pink fiberglass insulation. There were wooden studs. There were wires. But there was no room. There was no desk. There was no air. It was just a wall. I stared at the screen. My brain short-circuited. I had been in there. I had breathed the air. I had seen the monitors. How? Then I noticed something on the screen. The insulation looked fluffy, new, and the studs, they looked raw, not aged like the rest of the house framing. He had filled it. In the 6 hours I had been asleep, he must have had a crew come in. Or maybe he did it himself. He was an architect. He was a builder. He had dismantled the room, packed it with insulation, and sealed it up before I even woke up. It was a mechanical chase, Gideon said softly, taking the screen from my shaking hands. We filled it with extra insulation last month for soundproofing. Don't you remember signing the work order? I backed away. No, you moved it. You changed it. Celia, he said, stepping closer. You are hallucinating. You are seeing things that aren't there. You are losing your grip on reality, just like my mother did. He reached out to touch me. I flinched. Don't touch me, I whispered. I am trying to help you, he said. His voice hardened just a fraction. But you are making it difficult. If you can't be safe here, if you are going to destroy the house and hurt yourself, I might have to make other arrangements. Other arrangements? There is a facility, he said. Cliffside Gardens. It's very exclusive, very secure. They specialize in cases like yours. The threat hung in the air like a guillotine blade. He wasn't just going to kill me. He was going to commit me. He was going to lock me away in a padded room where no one would believe a word I said, and he would keep all my money. I looked at his face. He was winning. He had the power, the money, the doctor, and now the evidence of my insanity. I reached into my pocket. My fingers brushed against the cold, hard surface of the pearl earring. The earring. He had filled the room. He had changed the passwords. He had stolen the knife. But he had missed the earring. The earring was real. The earring was the anchor. If I argued with him now, he would call the men in white coats. If I screamed, I played into his hand. I took a deep breath. I let my shoulders slump. I let the fire die out of my eyes. I looked down at the floor. I forced my voice to tremble. I don't know what's happening to me, Gideon. He paused. He tilted his head, studying me. What do you mean? It felt so real, I said, looking up at him with tears in my eyes. I could have sworn I was in a room, but the insulation, the drill. I put a hand to my forehead. Am I going crazy? Gideon's shoulders relaxed. A slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. He walked over and wrapped his arms around me. I let him pull me into his chest. I smelled the sandalwood and the lye. Shh, he soothed, stroking my hair. You're not crazy, Celia. You're just sick. But I'm going to take care of you. We're going to fix this. Okay, I whispered into his sweater. Okay. Why don't you go downstairs and rest? He said. I'll bring you your pills, and then maybe we can sign those papers for the estate transfer, just to get it out of the way so you don't have to worry about the finances anymore. Yes, I said. That sounds good. I don't want to worry anymore. I pulled away and walked out of the closet. I walked down the stairs, holding the railing like a frail old woman, but inside, my mind was sharpening into a weapon. He thought he had broken me. He thought I had accepted his reality, but he had made one fatal mistake. He showed me the insulation. When I looked at the screen, I saw that the insulation was pink, but in the corner of the image, caught on a rough splinter of the wooden stud, was a tiny scrap of red silk, a thread from the blouse I had held yesterday. The room wasn't gone. He hadn't filled the whole thing. He had just built a false wall behind the paneling, a shallow box of insulation to fool the camera. The room was still there. The secrets were still there. He hadn't destroyed the evidence. He had just buried it. I walked into the kitchen. I didn't take the pills. I dropped them into the garbage disposal and turned it on. The grinding noise was vicious and satisfying. I wasn't going to argue with him anymore. I wasn't going to look for passwords. I was going to wait for the storm. I looked out the window. The sky was turning a bruised purple. The wind was picking up, whipping the whitecaps into a frenzy. The weather report said a bomb cyclone was hitting the Oregon coast tonight. Power outages were expected. Roads would be washed out. We would be cut off. Perfect. Gideon wanted to play games in the dark? He wanted to trap me in a house of secrets? I opened the drawer and took out a heavy metal meat tenderizer. I slipped it into the deep pocket of my robe. Tonight, the gaslight goes out, and in the dark, the hunter becomes the prey. The storm arrived at sunset. It didn't roll in gradually. It slammed into the coast like a hammer. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the wind began to scream against the glass walls of the living room. The ocean below was a churning cauldron of black water and white foam. I sat in the armchair by the fire, a blanket wrapped around my legs. Gideon stood by the window, watching the violence of nature with a glass of scotch in his hand. He loved storms. He loved anything that displayed raw, uncontrollable power. "It's going to be a bad one," he said, taking a sip. "The power lines are already flickering. We might be cut off by midnight." "I took the pills," I said. My voice was dull, flat. I stared at the fire, letting my mouth hang open slightly, mimicking the slack-jawed look of the heavily sedated. He turned and smiled. It was the smile of a zookeeper looking at a tamed lion. "Good girl. You'll sleep through the worst of it. Dr. Thorne said they would knock you out for 12 hours. "I feel heavy," I mumbled. I let my eyelids droop. "I think I will go up now." "I have some work to finish in the study," he said. "I'll join you later." I stood up, swaying slightly on purpose. I walked to the stairs, gripping the banister. I climbed slowly, feeling his eyes on my back every step of the way. I went into the bedroom, closed the door, and turned off the lights. I waited. I lay in the dark, listening to the wind howl. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30. Then I heard it. The heavy oak door of the study downstairs clicking shut. The faint, muffled sound of opera music drifting up through the floorboards. He was settling in. He felt safe. He thought his wife was in a chemical coma upstairs. I threw off the covers. I moved with the silence of a ghost. I didn't turn on a light. I didn't need to. I had memorized the layout of this room. I went to my bag, the one I had hidden in the back of the wardrobe. I pulled out a small, silver object. It wasn't jewelry. It was a bootable USB drive. Gideon thought he was clever locking me out of my own laptop by changing the user password. He thought that made the computer a brick, but he forgot that I wasn't just a wife. I was an auditor. I had spent 20 years recovering data from smashed hard drives and wiped servers. I sat on the floor of the walk-in closet, the furthest point from the door. I opened my laptop and inserted the USB drive. I held down the boot key and pressed power. The screen flickered. Instead of the Windows login screen demanding a password I didn't know, a black screen with green text appeared. Linux forensic mode. Loading. I bypassed his operating system entirely. I was now running the computer from my thumb drive. I had access to the hard drive as a raw file system. I didn't care about my old files. I needed to see the network. I connected to the house Wi-Fi. I launched a packet sniffer, a program that intercepts data moving through the air. Downstairs, Gideon was working. His computer was sending data to the cloud. I watched the streams of code scroll down my screen like a digital waterfall. He was logged into a secure banking portal in the Caymans, Trident Trust. I couldn't crack the bank's encryption. That would take a supercomputer, but I didn't need to break into the bank. I just needed to see what was on his screen. I activated a remote desktop protocol exploit. It was an old trick, one I used to catch executives who were cooking books in real time. Since we were on the same local network, and his firewall was set to trusted for home devices, I could mirror his display. A window popped up on my screen. I was looking at Gideon's desktop. My breath hitched. He wasn't looking at architectural plans. He was looking at a spreadsheet, a master ledger. It was titled Project Penelope. I scanned the rows. The columns were simple. Asset, acquisition date, liquidation date. Net profit, row 1, Sarah. Acquisition, 1998. Liquidation, 2003. Net profit, $1.2 million. Notes. Boating accident. Lake Tahoe. No witnesses. Row 2. Mariana. Acquisition, 2018. Liquidation, 2022. Net profit, $2.8 million. Notes. Cardiac event. Cremation expedited. Dr. T signed. I felt bile rise in my throat. He had itemized them. He had turned human lives into line items on a balance sheet. Acquisition and liquidation. Marriage and murder. And then I saw row 3. Row 3. Celia. Acquisition, 2025. Liquidation date. Pending. My eyes scanned across to the projected profit column, $4.5 million. He had valued me the highest. I was his retirement fund. I watched the cursor on the screen move. Gideon was typing. He was entering a date in the liquidation column for row 3. He typed, October 14th. I froze. Today was October 13th. He wasn't planning to kill me next month or next week. He was planning to kill me tomorrow. I watched as he opened a new window. It was a weather report, the storm tracking data. Hurricane force winds expected, emergency services suspended. He was using the storm. It was the perfect cover, a tragic accident during a blackout. Maybe I fell down the stairs in the dark. Maybe I wandered out onto the cliffs in my confused state and was swept away. He switched back to the banking tab. He was setting up a transfer. Beneficiary, the Blackwood Trust. Amount, full balance. Authorization, executive power of attorney. He was emptying my accounts tonight so the money would be safe offshore before I died tomorrow morning. I needed to save this. I needed evidence. I hit the record button on my screen capture software. I recorded every click, every transfer, every damning second of his digital life. I saved the video file to my USB drive. I encrypted it. I backed it up to a hidden server I kept for my old consulting firm. I had the proof. I had the motive. I had the weapon. But I was still trapped in the house with the killer. Suddenly, the screen on my laptop went black. The Wi-Fi signal dropped. The lights in the closet died. The hum of the refrigerator downstairs stopped. The power was out. The storm had severed the main line. We were in total darkness. I sat in the pitch-black closet, clutching the warm laptop to my chest. The silence was deafening. The opera music downstairs had stopped. Then I heard his voice. It wasn't shouting. It was calling out from the bottom of the stairs, cheerful and calm. "Celia? The power is out, darling. Stay right where you are. I'm coming to get you." I scrambled to my feet. I shoved the laptop under a pile of blankets. I grabbed the meat tenderizer from my robe pocket. He was coming. The timeline had moved up. If the power was out, the cameras were off, the security system was down, the neighbors couldn't hear. He wasn't going to wait for tomorrow. I heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs. Thump, thump, thump. He was coming to liquidate his asset. The darkness was total. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating blackness that you only find on the edge of the world, where the ocean meets the sky. The power outage had killed the hum of the refrigerator, and the whir of the ventilation, and the soft buzz of the smart home system. The only sound left was the wind. It screamed around the corners of the house like a dying animal. It slammed against the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of the bedroom with a force that made the steel beams groan. I sat in the corner of the closet with the meat tenderizer gripped in my right hand, hidden deep within the folds of my robe. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my breathing was slow and shallow. I was channeling the stillness of a corpse. If he thought I was sedated, I had to be heavy. I had to be slow. The beam of a flashlight cut through the bedroom door. It swung wildly for a second, illuminating the abstract paintings and the silk curtains before landing squarely on my face. I squinted and raised a hand to shield my eyes, feigning the confusion of a woman waking from a chemical sleep. Celia Gideon's voice came from behind the light. It was loud over the roar of the wind. "Thank God I found you. The storm is worse than we thought. The wind shear is hitting 100 miles an hour. I let my head loll to the side. Gideon." I slurred my words slightly, letting my tongue feel thick in my mouth. "What is happening?" "The lights. The grid is down," he said, walking toward me. The flashlight beam bobbed with his steps. "And the structural integrity of the window wall is compromised. We can't stay in the bedroom. If that glass blows in, we will be sucked out into the storm." He reached down and grabbed my arm. His grip was bruising. There was no tenderness in it anymore. He yanked me to my feet. I stumbled, leaning my weight against him. I dropped the meat tenderizer into the pocket of my robe, hoping the heavy terry cloth muffled the thud. "I am so tired, Gideon," I whined. "I just want to sleep." "You can sleep soon," he said. His voice was tight with adrenaline. "I need to get you to the safe room." The safe room? He wasn't even pretending anymore. Yesterday he had drilled a hole in the wall to prove the room didn't exist. He had gaslit me until I questioned my own sanity. Now that the lights were out and the end was near, the lie was no longer necessary. He dragged me deeper into the closet. He didn't go to the floorboard I had found. He went to the far shelf where the shoe rack was mounted. He reached behind a row of winter boots and pulled a hidden lever. There was a loud mechanical clunk. The section of the wall where he had drilled the hole, the section that had shown pink insulation, swung outward on a heavy steel pivot. It was a false front. I stared at it through half-closed eyes. The insulation was just a 3-inch deep frame attached to the front of the real steel door. It was a magician's trick, a prop designed to fool a camera. Behind the fake wall, the dark mouth of the secret room waited. "See," Gideon said, pushing me toward the opening. "It is a reinforced storm shelter. I built it for emergencies. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry about tornadoes or hurricanes. But we need it now." He was lying, even at the end. "There are no tornadoes on the Oregon coast." He shined the flashlight into the room. It was exactly as I remembered. The desk, the monitors, now dark and lifeless, the sleeping bag, and the bucket. "Go inside, Celia," he ordered, giving me a shove. "You will be safe in there. The walls are concrete, the door is steel. Nothing can hurt you in there." I hesitated at the threshold. The air inside was stale and cold. If I walked into that room, I was walking into my coffin. He would lock the door. He would leave me there in the dark while the storm raged. And when the power came back on, he would check his spreadsheet and fill in the final cell. Liquidation complete. I pulled back. "Gideon." "I don't like it," I cried, letting panic seep into my voice. "It's too small. It's dark. Get in," he snapped. The mask fell completely, his face contorted in the reflected light of the flashlight. He looked feral. "Get in the damn room, Celia." He grabbed my shoulders with both hands and tried to physically throw me into the space. This was it, the moment of contact. I didn't fight him with strength. I fought him with weight. I went boneless. I collapsed downward, pulling him off balance. We both stumbled into the doorframe. My hand went into my pocket. My fingers wrapped around the cold metal handle of the tenderizer, but I didn't swing. Not yet. I saw something. In the beam of his flashlight, which was now rolling on the floor where he had dropped it, I saw the locking mechanism of the door. It was a heavy magnetic lock, the kind that seals automatically when the door makes contact with the frame. If that door clicked shut, it was over. Gideon cursed and bent down to pick up the light. "You stupid old woman," he hissed. I was on my knees in the doorway, half in and half out. "I am sorry, Gideon," I sobbed, covering my face with my hands. "I am just so scared." He stood up, towering over me. He raised the flashlight like a club. "Get up," he roared. "Get inside, or I will drag you inside by your hair." I looked up at him. I looked past the blinding light. I looked at the shadow of the man I had married. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay, Gideon. I will go." I started to crawl into the room, but as I moved, I reached out with my left hand, the hand he wasn't watching, and I grabbed the small tube of lubricant oil that was sitting on the bottom shelf of the shoe rack. He kept it there for his dress shoes. I had spotted it yesterday, and in the chaos of the storm, I knew it was my only chance. I crawled over the threshold. Gideon was right behind me. He was eager to close the door. He was eager to be done with me. I slid into the darkness of the room. He stepped back into the closet. "Stay there," he said. His voice was calm again, terrifyingly calm. "I will come back for you when the storm passes." He reached for the heavy door. I squeezed the tube of oil into the palm of my hand. "Wait, Gideon," I screamed. "I think I dropped my pills." He paused. "What? My pills! I need them!" I panicked, scrabbling on the floor. He sighed. a sound of pure exasperation. He leaned in, shining the light on the floor. That was the mistake. He leaned in. I didn't look for the pills. I lunged. Not at him, but at the doorframe. I smeared the handful of thick, viscous oil over the magnetic striker plate and the latch bolt. "What are you doing?" he yelled. I pulled back into the shadows. "Nothing," I cried. "I just slipped." He didn't check the frame. He just wanted it to be over. He grabbed the handle and slammed the heavy door shut. Clang. The metal hit metal. I heard the whir of the magnets trying to engage. I held my breath. Outside, I heard Gideon let out a long exhale. "Goodbye, Celia," he said through the steel. I heard his footsteps walk away. I sat in the pitch-black silence. I waited for the click, the final seal that would lock me in forever. It didn't come. The oil was working. The magnets couldn't bond. The latch couldn't catch. I was in the dark. I was in the box. But the lid wasn't locked. And now Gideon was out there alone in the house, thinking he was safe, thinking he had won. He was wrong. I gripped the meat tenderizer. I stood up in the dark. I pushed gently on the door. It swung open an inch. The hunter had turned his back. And it was time for the prey to come out. I counted to 60. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. I forced myself to breathe in time with the count. My heart was a frantic bird battering against my ribcage, but my body had to be stone. 60. He was gone. The heavy footsteps had faded down the hallway. I pushed on the steel door. It was heavy, weighted with lead and concrete, but the hinges were well oiled. It swung open silently, gliding on the film of lubricant I had smeared on the frame. I stepped out of the suffocating box and back into the walk-in closet. The air here was still cold, but it was fresh. It tasted like freedom. I didn't run. Running is noisy. Running is for prey. I moved to the pile of blankets in the corner where I had shoved my laptop. I retrieved it, sliding the cold aluminum chassis into the waistband of my robe, cinching the belt tight. It was heavy, but I needed the evidence. I needed the recording of his screen. I stood in the darkness of the closet, listening. The storm was a constant roar outside, shaking the house, rattling the window panes. But inside, I heard the distinctive pop of a cork. He was in the bedroom, just 10 feet away. I froze, pressing myself into the gap between a row of long evening gowns. The silk brushed against my face like cobwebs. "To silence," I heard Gideon say. He was drinking, celebrating. I peered through the gap in the clothes. The bedroom was pitch black, illuminated only by the occasional flash of lightning that tore through the sky outside. In those strobe light flashes, I saw him. He was standing by the window, looking out at the chaos. He held a bottle of champagne in one hand and a glass in the other. He looked like a king surveying a battlefield he had just conquered. "It's better this way, Celia," he said. He wasn't talking to himself. He was talking to the wall, to the room he thought I was trapped in. He turned and walked toward the closet. My breath hitched. I gripped the handle of the meat tenderizer in my pocket. If he turned on the flashlight, if he swept the beam across the clothes, it would be over. I would have to fight a man twice my size and half my age, but he didn't turn on the light. He walked to the false wall, the wall that hid the secret room. He placed his hand against the wood. "You were a good investment," he whispered. His voice carried clearly in the dark. "Better than Sarah. Sarah fought too much. She scratched my face before she went into the water. But you went quietly. I bit my lips so hard I tasted copper. Don't worry, he continued, taking a sip of champagne. It will be quick. In the morning, when the storm clears, I'll open the door. You'll be asleep from the pills. Or maybe the lack of oxygen will have made you groggy. I'll carry you down to the cliffs. One slip on the wet rocks. A tragic accident. The grieving widower. He chuckled darkly. And with the money, I'll finally fix the foundation on the west wing. You're literally going to support this house, my love. He leaned his forehead against the paneling. Goodbye, Celia. He patted the wall, turned on his heel, and walked out of the bedroom. I heard him whistling a tune as he descended the stairs. La donna è mobile, woman is fickle. I waited until the whistling faded into the distance. Then I stepped out from the close. I looked at the false wall. He thought I was in there, slowly suffocating in the dark. He thought he was the only living soul walking the halls of Cliffside Manor. He was wrong. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the glitch in his perfect system. I was the variable he hadn't accounted for. I walked to the bedroom door and looked out into the hallway. It was a cavern of shadows. I knew this house better than he did. He knew the blueprints, but I knew the creaks. I knew which floorboard on the landing groaned when you stepped on it. I knew that the carpet in the hallway dampened sound if you walked on the edges. I moved to the railing and looked down into the living room. Below, in the flashes of lightning, I saw him. He had lit a candelabra on the dining table. He was sitting at the head of the table, his feet propped up, the bottle of champagne beside him. He was relaxing. I needed to change the game. I needed to terrify him. I needed to make him doubt his own mind before I delivered the final blow. I crept down the hallway, away from the stairs, toward the guest wing. I went into the small utility closet where the smart home hub was located. The power was out, so the main system was dead. But the emergency backup battery for the internal intercoms and the security speakers was still active. It was a separate low-voltage system. I opened the panel. The small green light of the backup battery blinked at me. I pulled the portable handset off the wall. It was an old-fashioned intercom system that connected to speakers in every room. I held the button down. I didn't speak. Not yet. I just tapped my fingernail against the microphone. Tap, 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 tap. The sound echoed through the house, amplified by the speakers. It was a hollow, rhythmic scratching sound. Downstairs, I heard the chair scrape against the floor. Gideon had stood up. Hello? His voice boomed up the stairs. Is someone there? I waited a beat. Then I leaned close to the mic and whispered. Eon. I released the button. The silence that followed was heavy. Celia? He called out. His voice was higher now, uncertain. That's impossible. He would be thinking it was a trick of the wind, or maybe the pills he gave me hadn't worked and I was screaming from inside the room. But the room was soundproof. He knew that. He built it. He shouldn't be able to hear me. I pressed the button again. It's cold. In here. I made my voice sound distant, ethereal, like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I heard glass shatter downstairs. He had dropped his champagne flute. Who is doing that? He shouted. Who is in my house? He was scared. Good. A scared man makes mistakes. A scared man gets sloppy. I hung the handset back on the wall. I left the utility closet and moved toward the back stairs, the servants' stairs that led directly to the kitchen. He would be coming up the main stairs soon. He would go check the safe room. He would want to verify that his prisoner was still locked tight. And when he did, I needed to be downstairs. I needed to be in the kitchen, because that's where the knives were. I moved like smoke down the narrow back staircase. I was 62 years old. My knees ached. My heart was weak. But tonight, I was the storm. I reached the bottom of the stairs and slipped into the dark kitchen. The lightning flashed again, illuminating the rows of gleaming steel knives on the magnetic strip. I reached out and took the largest one, a chef's knife with an 8-inch blade. I weighed it in my hand. It felt better than the meat tenderizer. It felt final. I heard running footsteps upstairs. He was pounding on the false wall. "Celia!" he was screaming. "Celia, answer me!" He was panicking. He was realizing that his perfect murder was unraveling. I walked out of the kitchen and into the dining room. I blew out the candles he had lit. Now the whole house was dark. I stood in the center of the room, the knife in my hand, and I waited for him to come back down. I stood in the center of the dining room, wrapped in darkness. The only light came from the violent flashes of lightning that illuminated the room in strobe-like bursts. 1 second, I saw the long mahogany table and the shards of glass on the floor. The next second, I was blind again. Upstairs, the house was silent. Gideon had stopped pounding on the wall. He had stopped shouting my name. Then I heard it, the sound I had been waiting for. Clang. The heavy steel door of the safe room slammed open against the closet wall. He had finally checked the latch. He had finally pushed on the door and realized that the magnets had never engaged. I held my breath, gripping the handle of the chef's knife so tight my knuckles ached. There was a pause, a long, terrible silence while he shined his flashlight into the empty room. I imagined his face. I imagined the confusion morphing into realization and then into pure, unadulterated rage. He would see the empty sleeping bag. He would see the monitors staring back at him blindly. And then he would look down at the doorframe and see the glistening smear of lubricant oil. "You bitch!" His scream tore through the house. It wasn't the voice of the charming architect anymore. It was the roar of an animal that had walked into a trap. "Celia!" he bellowed. "I know you are here. I know you are in the house." I didn't move. I forced my feet to stay rooted to the rug. I forced my breathing to slow down until it was nothing but a whisper of air in my throat. I am a shadow. I am a piece of furniture. I am not here. I heard his footsteps storming out of the bedroom. They were heavy and fast. He was running toward the stairs. I looked at the knife in my hand. It was 8 inches of sharp German steel. But Gideon was 6'2" and 200 pounds. If I tried to stab him, he would break my wrist before I even broke his skin. The knife was a last resort. My real weapon was the house itself. I needed him to come to me, but I needed to control where he came. I backed away from the dining room, moving silently into the grand foyer. The floor here was marble. It was slippery and cold, and it echoed if you weren't careful. I took off my slippers. I tossed them behind the console table. Bare feet are quieter. Bare feet can feel the vibrations of the floor. I saw the beam of his flashlight dancing wildly at the top of the stairs. He was coming down, but then he stopped. The beam swung away from the stairs It moved down the hallway toward his study. My stomach dropped. The gun? Of course. Gideon was a man who believed in security. He had a pistol. I had seen it once in a locked box in his desk drawer. A small black revolver that he said was for intruders. If he got that gun, the game changed. I couldn't fight a bullet with a knife. I had to stop him. Or at least I had to slow him down. I ran. I abandoned stealth. I sprinted across the foyer and into the living room. I grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the coffee table. It was thick lead crystal, weighing easily 5 pounds. I cocked my arm back and hurled it toward the kitchen. Crash! The vase shattered against the granite island with the force of a bomb going off. The sound was deafening in the quiet house. Upstairs, the flashlight beam froze. Kitchen, Gideon whispered. I heard him. The acoustics of the open stairwell carried his voice right to me. He didn't go to the study. He turned back to the stairs. The sound of the crash had triggered his instinct. He thought I was breaking out. He thought I was trying to escape through the garage. He came down the stairs, fast. I saw his shadow stretching long and distorted against the wall. I pressed myself behind the heavy velvet curtains of the living room window. The glass behind me was vibrating from the wind outside. If the window broke, I would be sucked out into the storm. But I had to take the risk. Gideon reached the bottom of the stairs. He didn't have the gun yet. He was holding a heavy brass candlestick he must have grabbed from the hallway table. It was a crude weapon, but deadly enough. He swung the flashlight toward the kitchen. I see you, he lied. Come out, Celia. Don't make this harder than it has to be. He walked past the living room. He walked right past the curtain where I was hiding. I could smell him. The scent of sweat and expensive cologne and stale champagne. He smelled like fear. He moved into the dining room, heading for the kitchen. Now, I slipped out from behind the curtain. I didn't attack him. I ran for the stairs. I needed to get to the study before he did. If I could get the gun, I could end this. I flew up the floating oak steps. My bare feet made soft, thumping sounds, but the wind outside masked them. I reached the landing just as I heard Gideon yell from the kitchen. Empty! He screamed. Where are you? He realized he had been tricked. He would be coming back. I ran down the hallway to his study. I burst into the room. It was pitch black. I fumbled along the wall until my hand found the desk. I ripped open the bottom drawer. I felt around frantically. Papers, a stapler, a box of cigars. Where was the lockbox? My fingers brushed against empty wood. Gone. The lockbox was gone. I felt a cold dread wash over me. He must have moved it, or maybe he was wearing it. Maybe he had taken the gun out earlier when the storm started just in case. Looking for this? The voice didn't come from downstairs. It came from the doorway behind me. I spun around. Gideon was standing there. He wasn't in the kitchen. He had doubled back. He had anticipated my move. He raised the flashlight. The beam blinded me, and in his other hand, I saw the glint of black metal. He had the gun. He had it the whole time. He had baited me. He had thrown the candlestick down and waited for me to make a run for the only weapon that could hurt him. You are smarter than I gave you credit for, Celia, he said. His voice was breathless. But you are still predictable. An auditor always looks for the asset. You wanted the gun. He stepped into the room. He kicked the door shut behind him. We were trapped in the study. Just me, him, and the gun. "Drop the knife," he said. He raised the pistol and pointed it at my chest. I looked at the knife in my hand. It looked pathetic now. A toy. I opened my hand. The knife clattered to the floor. "Good," Gideon said. He kept the light trained on my face. "Now sit down. In the chair. Behind the desk." I walked slowly around the desk and sat in his leather executive chair. The leather was cold. Gideon walked closer. He kept the gun leveled at my heart. He stopped on the other side of the desk. "You really disappointed me, Celia," he said, shaking his head. "We could have had a peaceful night. You would have gone to sleep. You wouldn't have felt a thing. Now it's going to be messy." "You killed them," I said. My voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. "Sarah, Mariana, you killed them all." "I liquidated them," he corrected. "Business is business. Sarah was a drunk. Mariana was a bore. And you were just nosy." "And the money?" I asked. "The 4.5 million? Spent," he laughed. "Or it will be. This house costs a fortune to maintain. The salt air eats everything. It eats the steel. It eats the stone. And it eats wives." He cocked the hammer of the gun. The click was loud in the small room. "Why wait?" I asked. I needed to keep him talking. I needed to think. "Why not just shoot me now?" "I am going to," he said. "But first, I want to know something. How did you get out? The oil?" "Yes," I said. "I saw it on the shelf." "Clever," he murmured. "Very clever. It's a shame, really. You would have made a great partner if you weren't so ethical." He raised the gun higher. He squinted one eye, aiming. "Goodbye, Celia." I gripped the edge of the desk. I braced myself for the bullet, but then the room exploded with light. Not from the flashlight, and not from the lightning. The computer monitors on the desk, all three of them, suddenly flashed to life. They blazed with a bright, blinding white light. Gideon flinched, shielding his eyes. "What the hell?" The power wasn't back on. The rest of the house was still dark. It was the uninterruptible power supply. The massive battery backup unit under the desk. I had kicked the power strip with my bare foot under the desk. I had spotted the glowing orange switch when I sat down. It was a desperate gamble. The sudden glare in the pitch-black room blinded him for a split second. I didn't wait. I grabbed the heavy bronze bust of Julius Caesar that sat on his desk, the one he used as a paperweight, and I launched myself across the desk. I swung the bronze head with both hands, screaming with every ounce of rage I had suppressed for 6 months. Gideon fired. Bang! The sound was deafening. I felt a searing heat graze my shoulder like a hot poker, but I didn't stop. The momentum carried me forward. The bronze bust connected with his hand holding the gun. There was a sickening crunch of bone. Gideon screamed, and the gun flew out of his hand, spinning across the room and sliding under the sofa. We crashed to the floor together. A tangle of limbs and rage. He was strong. He backhanded me across the face, and I tasted blood. My head snapped back, hitting the floor. Stars exploded in my vision. He scrambled on top of me, his hands going for my throat. "I will kill you with my bare hands," he screamed. Spittle flew onto my face. His thumbs pressed into my windpipe. The world started to go gray at the edges. I couldn't breathe. I clawed at his face. I dug my nails into his eyes. He roared and pulled back for a second. I brought my knee up, hard, into his groin. He doubled over, gasping for air. I rolled out from under him. I scrambled on my hands and knees toward the door. My shoulder was burning. Blood was soaking my robe. But I was alive. I grabbed the doorknob. I yanked it open and fell out into the hallway. "You can't run!" Gideon yelled from inside the study. I heard him crashing into the furniture, trying to stand up. I didn't run to the stairs. I couldn't outrun him now. I was injured. I was bleeding. I ran to the only place left. The master bedroom. The room with the glass walls. The room hanging over the cliff. I ran inside and locked the door behind me. It was a flimsy bedroom lock. It wouldn't hold him for long. I leaned against the door, clutching my bleeding shoulder. I looked at the wall of glass. The wind was battering it. The pain was flexing, bowing inward with the pressure of the storm. Gideon wanted an accident? He wanted the house to eat me? I looked around the room. I saw the heavy iron fireplace poker in the stand by the gas hearth. I grabbed it. I wasn't going to hide anymore. I heard Gideon slam against the bedroom door. "Open it!" he screamed. "It's over, Celia. There is nowhere to go." I walked to the center of the room. I stood in front of the glass wall. The lightning flashed, illuminating me like a specter. "Come in, Gideon!" I yelled back. "Come and get your inheritance!" The door splintered. One more kick, and he would be in. I raised the poker. Not at the door, but at the glass. I was going to bring the storm inside. The wooden door frame splintered with a sound like a gunshot. A heavy boot kicked through the lock, and the door swung open, crashing against the wall. Gideon stood in the doorway. He was a silhouette against the darkness of the hall, his chest heaving, his face a mask of bloody rage. He raised the gun. I didn't hesitate. I didn't look at him. I swung the heavy iron fireplace poker with all my strength. Not at him, at the glass. Crash! The sound was apocalyptic. The floor-to-ceiling pane of tempered glass didn't just break, it exploded. It shattered into 1,000,000 diamonds that sprayed out into the night. And then the night came in. The wind hit the room like a physical blow. 100-mile-an-hour gale screamed into the bedroom, turning the space into a vortex of pressure and noise. The curtains whipped violently, tearing from their rods. The lamp on the bedside table flew across the room and smashed against the wall. Gideon was knocked backward. The sudden change in pressure caught him off guard. He stumbled, dropping the gun again as he shielded his face from the flying debris. I dropped to the floor. The wind howled over my head, tearing at my robe, but I was low. I was crawling. I knew the layout of the floor better than he did. I scrambled toward the doorway, staying below the level of the bed. Gideon was shouting something, but his voice was lost in the roar of the storm. He was flailing, trying to stand up in the wind tunnel I had created. I made it to the hall. The pressure here was less intense, but the draft was sucking air from the rest of the house toward the broken bedroom window. Papers were flying out of the study. A vase tipped over in the corridor. I pulled the door shut behind me. The wind slammed it closed with a deafening bang. I was out. But I wasn't safe. I ran down the hallway, clutching my bleeding shoulder. The bullet graze was burning like fire, and blood was soaking through the thick fabric of my robe, making it heavy and cold. I needed to hide. I needed to regroup. I didn't go downstairs. That was where he expected me to go. He would expect me to run for the front door to try and escape into the rain. I went up. There was a narrow spiral staircase at the end of the hall that led to the widow's walk on the roof. But halfway up there was a small landing, a maintenance access point for the HVAC system. It was a dark, cramped space overlooking the great room below. I climbed the stairs, my bare feet silent on the metal treads. I squeezed into the shadows of the landing. From here, I could see the entire living room and the foyer through the wooden slats of the railing. I huddled in the dark, pressing my hand against my wound to staunch the flow of blood. I reached into my robe and pulled out my laptop. It was battered, and the screen was cracked in the corner, but the little green light was still blinking. It was still running. I opened the audio recording app. I set the gain to maximum. The storm was loud, but the acoustics of the house were designed to carry sound. Gideon had bragged about it. He said the vaulted ceilings were like a cathedral. Now that cathedral was going to be his confessional. Below me, the bedroom door opened again. Gideon stumbled out into the hallway. He looked battered. His shirt was torn and his hair was wild. He had the gun in his hand again. He swept the beam of the flashlight back and forth. "Celia!" he screamed. "You can't hide. The house is locked. The power is out. You are going to bleed out in the dark." He began to move down the hall, checking the rooms one by one. He kicked open the guest room door. He fired a shot into the darkness, just to terrify me. Bang! I flinched, but I didn't make a sound. I waited until he was standing in the gallery directly below my hiding spot. The gallery was an open space that connected the wings of the house. It had a high ceiling and marble floors. I hit record on the laptop. Then I picked up a small metal washer I had found on the maintenance floor. I tossed it over the railing. Clink, clink, clink. It bounced on the marble floor 10 feet away from him. Gideon spun around, aiming the gun at the sound. "Who's there?" "It's over, Gideon," I said. My voice floated down from the darkness above. The acoustics carried it, making it sound like I was everywhere. He looked up frantically, trying to pinpoint the source. "Come down here, Celia. Face me like a woman." "I am facing you," I said. "I am the judge, and the jury is listening." "There is no jury." He laughed a high, manic sound. "Just you and me and the storm. No one knows you are here. No one cares." "Dr. Thorne cares," I lied. "I sent him the file, Gideon. I sent him the ledger. He knows you are going to pin Mariana's murder on him to save yourself." Gideon froze. The flashlight beam wavered. "You're lying," he snarled. "You don't have the ledger." "I have everything," I said. "I have the spreadsheet, Project Penelope. I know about Sarah in Tahoe, I know about Mariana, and I know about the $4.5 million you stole from me." "It wasn't stealing," he shouted. He was losing control. The accusation about the money hit a nerve. "It was mine. I earned it. I put up with you for 6 months. I listened to your boring stories about fraud cases. I touched your wrinkled skin. I earned every penny." The little red line on my audio recorder spiked. He had admitted it. It was mine. I earned it. "And Mariana?" I pushed him. "Did you earn that too?" "She was weak," Gideon yelled, pacing in a circle below me. "She wanted to leave me. She wanted to take the house. She didn't understand that you don't leave Gideon Blackwood. I built this house. I built the walls she died in." "I built the walls she died in. Got you. I saved the file. I uploaded it to the cloud server using the laptop's cellular data connection. It was slow, but the file was small. Upload complete." I closed the laptop. I had the video of the bank transfer. I had the audio of the confession. I had enough to put him away for 3 consecutive life sentences. But I still had to survive the night. Gideon stopped pacing. He tilted his head. He was listening. He looked up at the ceiling. He looked directly at the ventilation grate that hid the maintenance landing. "You're up there," he whispered. I can hear the fan on your computer. My blood ran cold. The old laptop. The fan was whirring, struggling to cool the processor. He raised the gun. Found you! He fired. The bullet punched through the wooden slats of the landing inches from my face. Wood splinters sprayed into my eyes. I scrambled backward, crab walking away from the edge. He fired again. Bang! The bullet ricocheted off the metal ductwork with a spark. I heard him running for the spiral stairs. He was coming up. I couldn't stay here. It was a dead end. I pulled myself up. I ran along the narrow catwalk that ran above the living room. It was a maintenance walkway used for changing the high recessed light bulbs. It was narrow, barely 2 feet wide, and it had no railing on one side. Just a 20-foot drop to the marble floor below. I stepped onto the catwalk. The metal grated under my feet. Gideon burst onto the landing behind me. He saw me. Nowhere left to run, Celia. He stepped onto the catwalk. He was faster than me. He was stronger than me. And he had a gun. I reached the middle of the walkway. I stopped. I turned to face him. I was 20 feet in the air, balancing on a strip of metal in the dark. He walked toward me, smiling. He raised the gun one last time. Jump, he said, or I shoot. I looked at him. I looked at the gun. And then I looked at the heavy crystal chandelier that hung directly above his head. The winch cable for the chandelier ran right next to my hand along the wall. It was tied off on a cleat. I didn't jump. I grabbed the rope. I don't think so, Gideon, I said. I pulled the release pin. The rope burned through my palms like a live wire. I yanked the release pin with a guttural scream that was lost in the roar of the storm. For a split-second time, seemed to suspend itself. Gideon looked up. The arrogant smile vanished from his face and was replaced by the hollow mask of pure terror. He saw the 1,000 pounds of Austrian crystal and brass detach from the ceiling beam above him. He saw his death coming down like a glittering hammer. He tried to dive. He threw himself forward on the narrow metal grating, but he was too late. The chandelier fell. It didn't hit him squarely. If it had, it would have turned him into paste. Instead, the massive brass rim clipped the edge of the catwalk where he was standing. The impact was seismic. The metal walkway screamed as the bolts sheared off the wall. The grating twisted violently beneath our feet, throwing us both into the void. I heard the sickening crunch of the chandelier smashing into the marble floor 20 feet below. It sounded like a bomb going off in a jewelry store. Shards of crystal flew like shrapnel. I didn't fall all the way. I had wrapped my arm around the vertical support cable of the catwalk. I swung wildly into the wall, my injured shoulder slamming against the steel bracket. The pain was blinding white and absolute. I cried out as my grip slipped, but I scrambled for purchase, finding a foothold on a ventilation duct. Gideon wasn't so lucky. I looked down into the gloom of the living room. The chandelier was a ruin of twisted metal and glass dust. And lying next to it was Gideon. He wasn't moving. One of his legs was bent at an angle that legs are not supposed to bend. He was covered in white dust, like a ghost. I hung there for a moment, gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was alive. I was still the auditor, and I had just balanced the books. I climbed down the maintenance ladder, my hands shaking so badly I almost fell twice. My feet touched the cold marble floor. I was barefoot, bleeding, and exhausted, but I felt a surge of adrenaline that was colder and sharper than anything I had ever felt before. I walked toward him. I picked up a heavy shard of crystal from the floor. It was sharp as a scalpel. Gideon groaned. He rolled onto his side, dragging his broken leg. He coughed, and blood splattered onto the white dust. He looked up at me. His eyes were glassy. He looked small. The monster who had terrorized me for 6 months, the architect who had built a murder house, was just a broken old man lying in the debris of his own ego. "Celia," he wheezed. "Help me." I stopped 5 feet away from him. I looked at his shattered leg. I looked at the gun which had skittered across the floor and was now lying under the sofa, out of his reach. "I am not here to help you, Gideon," I said, my voice flat and devoid of pity. "I am here to close the account." He tried to push himself up but collapsed back with a cry of pain. "You can't leave me here," he gasped. "I need a doctor. I need Eris." "Eris isn't coming," I said, stepping closer. "No one is coming, Gideon. The bridge is washed out. The power is down. It is just us." He looked at the crystal shard in my hand. His eyes widened. "Are you going to kill me, Celia? Are you going to murder your husband in cold blood?" I looked at the jagged glass. It would be so easy. One stroke across the carotid artery. It would be justice. It would be for Sarah, for Mariana, for the women he had erased. But I am not a killer. I am a forensic accountant. I don't deal in blood. I deal in evidence. I dropped the crystal shard. It clattered on the floor next to his head. "No, Gideon," I said. "Death is too easy for you. You don't get to die. You get to lose." I reached into my robe and pulled out my phone. The screen was cracked, but it was still working. I turned it around so he could see. I showed him the upload progress bar. It was green. 100% complete. "Do you know what that is?" I asked. He stared at the screen, uncomprehending. "That is your life, Gideon," I said. "That is the ledger from your computer. That is the video of you stealing my money. That is the audio recording of you confessing to killing Mariana. And it is not just on my phone. It is on a secure server in Washington, D.C. It is in the inbox of the FBI Cybercrimes Division. And it is in the inbox of every major news outlet on the West Coast." His face went pale beneath the dust. "No," he whispered. "You couldn't. The internet is down." I smiled. It was a cold, wolfish smile. "I used the cellular backup," I said. "It took a while, but it went through while you were chasing me. While you were bragging about your victory, I was destroying your future." He shook his head, his denial frantic and pathetic. "They won't believe you," he spat. "I am Gideon Blackwood. I am a pillar of this community. You are just a crazy old woman who forgot to take her pills. They will believe the bank transfers I said. They will believe the forensic metadata. And they will believe the bodies." "Bodies?" he stammered. "I know about the garden, Gideon," I said. "I guessed. When I saw the landscaping bills in your ledger. You spent $50,000 on soil excavation the week after Sarah disappeared. You didn't dump them in the ocean. You kept them. You are a hoarder, Gideon. You buried them in the rose garden, didn't you?" He went silent. His mouth hung open. The truth was a physical weight crushing him into the floor. "I can make a deal," he whispered. His voice was trembling. "I have money offshore, accounts you didn't find. I can give you half. I can give you $10 million, Celia. Just delete the file. Help me get to the boat." I laughed. It was a dry, harsh sound. "You still don't get it, do you? I don't want your money. I have my own money, and I have my dignity, and I have something you will never have." "What?" he asked. "I have a clear conscience." I turned away from him. I walked to the wet bar, which had miraculously survived the destruction. I poured myself a glass of water. My throat was parched.
"Where are you going?" he screamed. "Don't turn your back on me, bitch!"
I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over the driveway. The storm was breaking. The wind had died down to a manageable howl. And in the distance, through the thinning fog, I saw something. Blue lights. They were faint at first, just a rhythmic pulsing in the darkness. But they were getting closer. I turned back to Gideon. "Do you hear that?" I asked. He stopped struggling. He listened. "Sirens. The police," I said. "I didn't just upload the files, Gideon. I called them. I told them there was an intruder. I told them my husband had been attacked." He looked at me with pure hatred. "You set me up." "I caught a predator." I corrected him. The blue lights swept across the living room walls, illuminating the wreckage. The chandelier, the glass, the blood. It looked like a war zone. I walked over to the sofa and picked up the gun. I held it loosely in my hand. Gideon's eyes tracked the weapon. "Are you going to shoot me now?" he asked, hope flickering in his eyes. He wanted me to shoot him. If I shot him, he could claim self-defense. He could claim I was the aggressor. I ejected the magazine. I pulled back the slide, and the bullet in the chamber spun out onto the floor. I tossed the empty gun onto the chair. "No," I said. "I am just making sure you don't do anything stupid before they get here." I walked to the front door. I unlocked it. I opened it to the night air. The cool, damp breeze hit my face, washing away the smell of ozone and fear. I stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the flashing lights. I looked back at the man who had tried to turn me into a line item. He was crying, not tears of remorse, tears of a narcissist who realizes the mirror has been broken. The police cruisers roared up the driveway, tires crunching on the gravel. Doors slammed. Voices shouted commands. I stepped out onto the porch. I raised my hands. "Mrs. Blackwood," a voice shouted from the darkness. "I am here," I called back. My voice was strong. "I am here, and I am alive." The lights of the police cruisers were blinding. They cut through the lingering fog and painted the white facade of Cliffside Manor in alternating stripes of blue and red. It looked like a crime scene, but to me, it looked like a victory parade. I sat on the bumper of an ambulance wrapped in a shock blanket. A paramedic was cleaning the wound on my shoulder. He told me I was lucky. He said the bullet had just grazed the deltoid muscle. A few inches to the right, and it would have hit the bone. A few inches down, and it would have hit my heart. I didn't feel lucky. Luck is for gamblers. I felt competent. I felt precise. I had calculated the risk, and I had executed the plan, and now I was watching the returns roll in. I saw them bring Gideon out on a stretcher. He was strapped down, his broken leg immobilized in a yellow splint. He wasn't the charming architect anymore. He wasn't the master of the universe. He was a gray-faced old man in a torn shirt covered in drywall dust and his own blood. As they wheeled him past me, the procession stopped for a brief second. Gideon turned his head. His eyes found mine. I expected hate. I expected him to scream or curse or spit at me. But there was nothing. His eyes were empty. The narcissist had been hollowed out. He had lost his audience, he had lost his money, and he had lost his freedom. Without those things, Gideon Blackwood ceased to exist. He was just a shell. I didn't say a word. I just raised my paper cup of lukewarm water in a silent toast. They loaded him into the back of the ambulance. A police officer shut the doors with a heavy final slam. It was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Better than the crash of the chandelier. Better than the applause of a courtroom. It was the sound of a book snapping shut. Detective Miller came over to me. He was a young man with a kind face and tired eyes. He held a plastic bag in his hand. Inside was my phone. "We got the files, Mrs. Blackwood," he said. "We listened to the recording. It's all there. The confession, the fraud. We picked up Dr. Thorne at the airport an hour ago. He was trying to board a flight to Mexico. He is singing like a canary. He is trading everything he knows about your husband for a plea deal." I nodded. I knew Thorne would break. Cowards always break first. And the garden, I asked. The detective looked down at his boots. He looked uncomfortable. "We have a forensic team coming in at first light with ground-penetrating radar, but based on what you said on the recording, we expect to find them, Sarah and the others." He looked up at me with a mixture of awe and fear. "You did a hell of a thing, Mrs. Blackwood. Most people would have run." I looked at the house towering above us. The broken window in the master bedroom was a jagged black hole. The front door was wide open. It looked wounded. "I couldn't run," I said quietly. "This is my house." The next few months were a blur of depositions and court dates and media frenzies. The story of the architect and the auditor was front-page news from Seattle to San Diego. They called me the Iron Widow. They called me a hero. I didn't care about the names. I just cared about the verdict. Gideon pleaded guilty. He had no choice. The digital trail I had compiled was airtight. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. He will die in a concrete box just like the one he built for me. The only difference is that his box has a toilet and mine had a bucket. Dr. Thorne lost his medical license and went to prison for 15 years as an accessory. The network was dismantled. The money was recovered. When the dust settled and the cameras went away, everyone expected me to sell. My friends told me to move. They said the house was cursed. They said it was a mausoleum of trauma. They said I should take the settlement money and buy a condo in Florida and play bridge for the rest of my life. But I am not a bridge player. I am a builder. I stood on the balcony of the master bedroom 6 months after that night. The glass wall had been replaced. It was stronger now, reinforced with hurricane-proof laminate. The chandelier in the living room was gone, replaced by a modern art installation made of woven steel. I had renovated. I had ripped out the walnut paneling in the closet. I had torn down the false walls. I had exposed every dark corner and filled it with light. I walked to the railing and looked out at the ocean. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and violet. It was beautiful. I sipped my wine. It was a vintage Cabernet from Gideon's cellar. It tasted better now that it was mine. I didn't keep the house because I was sentimental. I kept it because it was a trophy. When a hunter kills a predator, they keep the pelt. They mount the head on the wall to remind themselves that they won. This house is my pelt. Every time I walk down the floating staircase, I remember the night I outsmarted a killer. Every time I hear the wind howl against the glass, I remember that I am the storm. Gideon thought he was building a legacy. He thought he was building a monument to his own genius. But he was wrong. He was just the contractor. I am the owner. And as I stood there watching the waves crash against the rocks below, I felt a deep and abiding peace. The ledger was balanced. The debt was paid. And the view from the top of the cliff was absolutely magnificent. So that is my story. I would love to hear what you think. If you found out your partner was a monster, would you run away? Or would you stay and fight to burn their kingdom down? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe in justice, please subscribe to Silver Fox Legacy. Until next time.